Good morning, everyone. My name is Yesha Cyril Key. Today, we will discuss cultural studies, an academic field that helps us understand how culture shapes society, influences identity, and affects the way we think and behave. So, let's have a quick overview about cultural studies. Let's explore its key principles and why it matters in understanding the world around us. So, what is cultural studies? Cultural studies is an interdisciplinary field that examines how culture influences our thoughts, behaviors, and social relationships. It does not limit culture to art or literature. Instead, it looks at everyday practices such as media, trends, beliefs, and social behavior. So the field began at the Birmingham Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies, or the CCCS, in the United Kingdom, where scholars like Stuart Hall, Raymond Williams, and Richard Hogarth studied how meaning is created and how power operates in cultural life. Essentially, cultural studies helps us understand that culture is not just something we consume. It is something that shapes us and helps define how we interpret the world. So the next question is why it matters. Of course, cultural studies is important because culture plays a major role in shaping our values, identities, and worldviews. So, by studying culture, we uncover hidden power structures and inequalities that influence everyday life. It helps us see the connections between media, society, and individual behavior. And most importantly, cultural studies encourages critical thinking. It teaches us to question what we see, to recognize bias, and to understand how social forces influence our beliefs and actions. Now let's move on to its key principles. First is we have culture as power. One of the main ideas in cultural studies is that culture is deeply connected to power. Culture is not neutral. It controls what society accepts as normal, desirable, or appropriate. Media, advertisements, movies, and music can reinforce certain beliefs and marginalize others. Because of this, culture can maintain inequality, but it can also be a space where people resist, challenge, and change dominant ideas. Understanding culture as power helps us see how influence works in society. The next key principle is the interdisciplinary approach. Cultural studies uses an interdisciplinary approach because culture is too complex to be explained by a single discipline. It draws from sociology, anthropology, psychology, media studies, linguistics, literary theory, and history. So, by combining these perspectives, cultural studies gains a deeper understanding of how culture works. So, this flexibility allows scholars to examine cultural practices from multiple angles and to see how different social forces interact. The third key principle is the everyday life matters. Of course, cultural studies emphasizes that everyday life is one of the most important areas to study. Culture is not limited to formal works like literature or fine arts. It is found in the shows we watch, the music we listen to, the trends we follow, and the content we consume on social media. So these daily activities reflect our desires, fears, and identities. So by analyzing everyday culture, we learn how society really functions and how people negotiate their place within it. The fourth key principle is the ideology and hegemony. So when we say ideology, it refers to the set of beliefs and values that shape how people view the world. And when we say hegemony, on the other hand, it describes how powerful groups maintain control through culture rather than through force. So examples include beauty standards, gender expectations, and consumer habits. So these ideas are presented as normal, even though they may benefit some groups more than others. Cultural studies examines how these dominant ideas are created, reinforced, and sometimes resisted. And the fifth key principle is we have representation and identity. So when we say representation, it refers to the way people and groups are portrayed in cultural texts such as movies, news, and social media. So these portrayals significantly affect how individuals understand themselves and how society sees them. Stereotypes, positive images, or the absence of certain groups all shape identity and social perception. Cultural studies analyzes how representation affects issues of race, gender, sexuality, and class, and how these portrayals can either challenge or reinforce harmful narratives. And the sixth key principles is we have the audience interpretation. Cultural studies believes that audiences are not passive. People do not simply accept cultural messages. They interpret them based on their background, beliefs, and personal experiences. Stuart Hall's encoding or decoding theory explains that audiences may accept a message, negotiate with it, or completely reject it. This idea highlights that meaning is not fixed. It is created in the interaction between the audience and the text. Every viewer brings their own understanding, which affects how cultural messages are received. And the seventh key principle of cultural studies is we have the social change. Cultural studies promotes awareness, critical thinking, and social responsibility. By revealing how culture shapes inequality and power, it empowers individuals to question unfair systems and advocate for change. So the field encourages equality, justice, and inclusion by challenging harmful norms and promoting diverse perspectives. Ultimately, cultural studies aims to use knowledge to improve society and create more inclusive cultural environment. So in overall, cultural studies teaches us that culture is powerful and deeply connected to social life. It shows that meaning is created through representation, identity, and audience interpretation. It reminds us that people play an active role in shaping culture rather than simply accepting it. Finally, cultural studies emphasizes that culture can be used to maintain power, but also to inspire social change, making it a valuable tool for understanding and transforming society.
And for application of cultural studies is applied in many real world areas. First is media analysis, understanding how movies, TV shows, social media, and news shape identity and beliefs. Cultural studies help us understand how media such as films, TV shows, and social platforms shape the way people see themselves and others. It also examines how certain groups are portrayed, how this representation influences beliefs, identity, and behavior. For example, analyzing how women are represented in action films. For second is education. Helps teacher recognize how culture influences learning, participation, and students' identity. In education, cultural studies help teachers understand how a student's cultural backgrounds affect the way they learn, speak, and participate in class. It also encourages the use of diverse materials so students feel represented and included in the learning process. For example, including diverse cultural materials in lesson. And for the third is communication and advertising. Use the study how ads influence consumers' behavior and reinforce cultural stereotype. Cultural studies examine how advertisement and communication strategies influence people's choices, desires, and attitude. It reveals how ads often use cultural symbols and stereotypes to persuade customers and shape trends. For example, how an advertisement creates desires for certain lifestyle. And for fourth is politics and society. Examines how cultural narratives influence political opinions and social movements. In politics, cultural studies look at how cultural message and narrative affect public opinions, voting behaviors, and social movements. It also includes analyzing popular content, such as memes used to spread political ideas or influence communities. For example, is memes used in political campaigns. And for the fifth is gender and race studies. So, gender and race studies identify discrimination and inequalities hidden in cultural practices. So, cultural studies helps uncover hidden inequalities related to gender and race in every practices. Media and traditions. It examines how certain cultural messages reinforce discrimination, such as unrealistic beauty standard or product that privilege certain skin tones. For example, how beauty pageant or skin whitening product reflect racial biases. And for the sixth is popular culture analysis. Studies music, fashion, games, and trends to understand how youth, culture, and social change. Cultural studies examines every trend such as music, fashion, online games, and social media content to understand how they influence people's identities and behaviors. It helps explain how popular activities, especially among the youth, reflect changing values, social issues, and forms of self-expression, such as how TikTok trends shape the way young people present themselves and connect with others. There are 5 theories of development in cultural studies. First is representation theory. Representation theory focuses on how media, language, and symbols shape the way people see reality. Representation theory explains how media, language, and symbols influence the way we understand reality. It shows that what we see in ads, films, or social media is not neutral. It shapes idea about beauty, gender, race, and other identities. For example, how beauty standards are created through advertisement. And for the second theory of development, hegemony by Antonio Gramsci explains how powerful groups maintains culture control by shaping beliefs, norms, and values, not just through force. Hegemony describes how powerful groups maintain control by shaping what society believes in normal or or common sense. Instead of forcing people, they influence culture so strongly that people voluntarily accept the dominant ideas and social rules. For example, people accept social rules because they seem normal, not because they are forced. And for the third is identity formation. Studies how gender, race, class, and sexuality influence who we are. So, this theory examines how our identity is shaped by social categories like gender, race, class, and sexuality. It explains how we are in not just personal choice but also influenced by the expectations, labels, and meaning created by society. For example, how society defines what is meant to be masculine or feminine. That example of identity formation. And for the fourth theory, power and resistance. For power and resistance, it examines how culture can be used to challenge or resist dominant ideas. This theory explores how culture can both support and challenge power. It looks at how groups, especially marginalized ones, use music, fashion, art, or social movements to resist dominance norms and express alternative ideas or beliefs. For example of power and resistance is youth subculture linked punk or hip hop expressing resistance to authority. And for the fifth and last theory, which is globalization and cultural hybridization, looks at how culture mix and change due to global media, travel, and technology. This theory studies how cultures influence each other because of global media travel, migrations, and technology. It also explains how cultural elements blend together, creating a new hybrid forms like K-pop, which mixes Korean's music styles with global pop influences. For example of globalization and cultural hybridization is K-pop becoming global and blending Western and Korean influences.